Good afternoon. I'm Eric Masters. I'm a professor, commentator, and podcaster. You can reach me at the email address or find me at the YouTube channel noted on this slide. I'm here to talk a little bit about some recent updates with regard to the auto workers' efforts to organize non-union auto companies in the United States. Today is April the 30th, 2024. The updates pertain to Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, unfair labor practices filed recently by the UAW against automakers in the U.S., industry layoffs, and the Southern Governor's Statement on the United Auto Workers, which was issued recently via the Governor of Alabama. With regard to Volkswagen, as many of you probably already know, on April the 19th, the vote was tallied and released. The UAW won this election. It got 73% of the votes cast, which was a major victory. Evidently, the UAW did a very good job of translating its signatures of authorization cards into actual votes for certification. Mercedes-Benz, the UAW has filed for a petition with the National Labor Relations Board to hold an election, which will be held on May the 13th through the 17th at the Vance, Alabama site, where there are about 5,000 Mercedes workers employed. Although the specific information was not released by the UAW, it is believed that at least 70% of the people of that prospective bargaining unit signed authorization cards. And the question now becomes, will the UAW be able to succeed as it did in Chattanooga in translating those authorization signatures into actual votes for certification? If it does, and I suspect it has the wherewithal to do so based on the efforts it's put into garnering support at this site, it will win the election. There was also an interesting poll released by A More Perfect Union. I'm not familiar with the details of this poll, so can't account for anything about its methodology. But it was reported in the media recently, and the link to the site is on this slide, and it indicates that 52% of Alabamians said they supported unionizing auto workers, while just 21% were opposed. This sort of is counter-conventional or counterintuitive because it's widely suspected that the South is vehemently anti-union. That type of sentiment may be muted somewhat in recent years. This is based on data from the National Labor Relations Board over the past several months since the UAW launched its organizing campaign at the end of November of 2023 after its record contracts with the Big Three. It's the number of unfair labor practice charges that it's brought against companies among the set of 13 non-union companies with facilities in the U.S. You can see that there have been 5 charges filed against Mercedes, 5 charges against Volkswagen, and on down the list. Recently in the auto industry, there have been announcements of a number of layoffs. Some pertain to the Big Three, which occurred right after the contract were consummated in November of last year, and also more recently as Stellantis has announced layoffs, and it's also laid off or terminated some temporary employees. Tesla's made the news recently announcing a layoff of 10% of its workforce. Rivian has announced a layoff of 10% of its workforce. Ford has announced its intention to dramatically cut hourly workforce in production of the F-150, and you can go on down the list. So what you see is a very uncertain situation in the auto industry, due not only to the costs of operating, but also the difficulties associated with transitioning to electric vehicles. As I mentioned earlier at the outset, 6 governors penned a letter criticizing the United Auto Workers and saying that basically they didn't welcome them to represent workers at their auto factories in the states. And they said, among other things, that the UAW reflected the values of democratic socialists and that those values were inconsistent with the workers in its states. This represents an escalation in the opposition to the UAW attempting to organize. And what I think it foretells is that various other oppositional forces, such as the National Right to Work Committee and other anti-union organizations, will step up their efforts, as will the companies that are non-union and have been targeted by the UAW to resist the UAW's effort to keep the union at bay. I hope you've enjoyed this update. Thank you for joining me. Have a good day.